Yeah, you tracking the whole time.
Only letting us out to drink firewood or work construction jobs. But now, all this bliss are being ruined. Say, Paleface, got 'em redwood?
Yes, sir, I like the redwood cigarette as well.
State police ahead. Now we're
Shoots
talking.
of all kinds everywhere.
I've never been so happy to see a state trooper ever before, man. Let's go. There he is, right there. Right there.
They're too manly for me.
Damn straight, Chippy. Hey, I don't understand what Pablo has to do with all this.
The redskin
And there goes your boy.
something terrible is coming. He thinks it's
It's a high-speed chase now.
He's not happy about it. He's stuff in the wind.
There's some land
Okay, they covered. Let it go.
Yep.
They covered.
Trying to say, Gordon, is this is a land of freedom, not a land to share equally.
I don't understand.
Look at the lights flashing. Everything's flashing now because of the security.
Damn straight you can't, woman. 2 scotches and a ceremonial bottle of water for the chief.
I'd use the local police force, but the fact is, Gordon, they're useless. Lone existentialist crime fighters.
120 miles per hour.
With an addiction to justice. Much better at fighting evil than government fat cats and bloated examples of America's descent into decadence.
Amen.
They think that the commies have infiltrated the moving pictures. They're writing subversive themes into scripts to influence our children and women. The fact is, there's only one kind of red we like in this country. A redskin who knows his place and wears feathers a lot while having very little understanding of syntax. Not goddamn communists.
There's communists in the Vinewood. Oh, but this used to be a nice country. Oh, Gordon, I'm scared.
I'm scared too, Mama. What I'll do when I catch them.
We scalp 'em big nasty.
All right. Simmer down. I can find a way to sneak onto that motion picture studio lot and have a look around, see?
I knew I can count on you. Who better to protect America than a president, a demon, a
Look at the lights going on and on.
indigenous people?
This is security.
Smoke 'em peace pipe.
I'm in.
Okay, all right, let's go. I know exactly where to start. Molly, we're going in here. Can't start a case without a fist of gin. Help the man think. Now, where to find these pinkos? Hey there, partner. Where you
140.
from?
Opening that thing up.
I'm from Georgia.
Oh, I do love pink.
Hey, I'm real American. I sleep with sister and
Look at the lights. You
finger
can tell
shake.
the lights are flashing like
I
crazy.
gotta solve this case. I know just how to get into that movie.
Did you see it on?
Hurry, look what I
It cut off. The security work.
Yes,
It cut off. You goddamn right it did. Let's go. Kill switch working, baby. Shout out to the kill switch. Shout out to the kill switch. That's right. Get the fuck out. Let's go. Some tackle or tracked down by K9. Taken into custody. What county was that? I'll go back to security wins, baby. Let's go. It only took him 30 minutes, but I mean, it finally worked. I don't know what security he got, but he might want to upgrade. Not saying that it didn't work, because it did work eventually.
Where are you going?
Look the other way, pal. We're fighting communists.
Oh, I hate these communists. They killed my father in Stalingrad. Look in the writers.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Laura Ingram. This is the Ingram Angle from Washington tonight. Well, Hegseth drops a bomb on the media.
Shut up, you blow
It's in your DNA, in your blood, to cheer against Trump. Because you want him not to be successful so bad.
Ooh, that was rough. And plus, it was time to call in the closer.
If the bill doesn't pass...
Tom Connors here. How can I help you, sir?
Think of it.
And inside the twisted minds of liberal women who believe...
Of course. May I ask where to?
I had a knowing without looking at my
I'll
phone.
send that round right away.
Everything in my body, in my mind, in my soul, in my energy felt like that was not true.
My energy. But first, the relatable socialist. That's the focus of tonight's angle. Now, if you're not old enough, if you're too young to remember what New York City was like in the 70s and even early 80s, here's a little refresher. This is what Midtown looked like. Peep shows everywhere. There was urban blight. strip clubs in Times Square. Generally, it was just filthy. And of course, crime was out of control. Here's the New York Times headline from December 26, 1979. The year 1700.
Yo, what you need?
Break a record. Of course, the economy.
Done. Shit, rise on the way.
It was an era of urban decay and decline. So why would New Yorkers ever want to return to such a time? Now, it was bad when liberals like de Blasio were in the city, but what about socialists? His program is tax the rich, who of course already pay, through the nose in taxes in the city, and then the promise of free stuff to young people. What could go wrong? After all, his PR machine works 24/7 to sell Mamdani as the new Obama, because she's so relatable.
My team says I move my hands too much in these videos, so for this one, they're staying in my pocket. Actually, you move it in your pocket. So I'm holding this on. I'm only bringing it first. Next bill, next bill. Next bill, baby. That's next bill, baby. What are you doing?
It's so authentic, especially since he's an honorary squad member. What did it feel like when you won?
One of the things that reminds me of is when you were running and when you won, it was this moment for so many where it felt like democracy could be different, that politics could be different.
Connecting with the Instagram and Snapchat lefties, Mamdani traffics in buzzwords and emotions, spooning with his mentor.
Today has been so moving because people feel like it could actually be different. They could see themselves, they could see their life, and I think that is a beautiful, beautiful experience, and it's been lovely building it with you.
Lovely. Forget the fact that despite all the hype, she's done nothing to actually improve the lives of working people. Again, there are a lot of generalities, a lot of feelings, always sold with a smile.
How do you define being a democratic socialist? I think of the words of Dr. King, who decades ago said, call it democracy or call it democratic socialism. There must be a better distribution of wealth for all of God's children in this country.
That's the rub. In a city where the state income tax can run as high as 10.3%, and add that to a top New York City tax of 3.87% plus the federal tax, 35 to 37%, that's already 50% in taxes, plus of course sales taxes, congestion pricing fees, etc., etc. But remember, proposals to soak the rich, they're nothing new, but they always end with the same result. Businesses, families, and talent fleeing. Given the Democrats' utter failure to deliver for the middle class, Mamdani's rise is entirely predictable. And he did get this right.
It is part of a larger referendum on where the party goes. So at the national level, after the presidential election, we saw that New York was actually the state with the largest swing in the country towards Donald Trump. 11.5 points. That swing took place far from the caricature of Trump voters, instead taking place in the hearts of immigrant New York City.
Of course, the machine behind Mamdani is working overtime to rebrand him from his old radical ways. So we're supposed to think that he no longer believes in defunding the police, despite the litany of social media posts where he urged just that. And we're supposed to ignore all of his old views on ending cash bail. The man is obviously deeply anti-law enforcement, so not even think about that. And he thinks that our legal system is too harsh toward criminals. That's why he wants to ban prisons. But we're supposed to forget that too. And of course, all those New Yorkers who believe in the Second Amendment, maybe they got their concealed carry permits after the Heller decision, or they have a gun at home for self-protection, look out. Because a few years back, he urged a total gun ban. But you can't mean that, right? Just saying that. Well, if he's elected, does that mean his security detail will only carry slingshots? Look, you almost feel for them. Democrats are in a huge bind here. They're trapped. Bill Clinton and Schumer are playing it cool right now, congratulating Mamdani but not endorsing him. They're smart enough to know that if he wins, the city's going to crater and take the Democrat Party along with it. When Virginia gubernatorial candidate, faint moderate Abigail Spanberger, was asked about Mamdani, well, she tried to punt.
Are you concerned that you'll be painted with that same brush, that sort of liberal socialist out of touch brush?
So I do not pretend to know anything about New York City politics or the outcomes of that election. What I know is my state, the Commonwealth of Virginia, a diverse, a vibrant, a large state. Virginia is a really exciting place.
Oh my goodness, is she a fraud? The Democrat establishment knows that if they're seen as opposing him, a chunk of liberal urban voters will revolt, just like Tim Walz's daughter.
I know it might surprise some people, but feeding kids lunch, providing child care, having accessible and functional public transportation, among many other things, are popular policies everywhere. They're popular everywhere.
You just lost about 100,000 brain cells by watching that soundbite. Sweetie, if they were popular everywhere, Trump would not be president. Nevertheless, I have to say, I disagree with some of my friends who are posting on social media, and they're basically saying, let's just write off places like New York City and LA, because they're hopeless. I think that's a huge mistake. The voters there aren't going to leave America. They're here to stay. And the country is going to be more Hispanic and more Asian as time goes on. And our policies, the MAGA policies, they will work for everyone. Reagan didn't write off Democrat states and cities in 1980. He fought for every vote. And Trump, well, God, Trump grew his support everywhere.
Hey, so, I know you've been there already, but Pooh just called and said I can come through and get a tour of Dre's studio as a thank you for what we did for him. Lamar crazy ass her, so you know that fool gonna be there too. But it's gonna be cool. We'll do it whenever it's good for you. Man, I'm excited for this. Look, bring a friend if you like. This one gonna hit different, alright? Peace, homie.
So we should be there when the voters turn on him, which we know they will eventually do. And that's the angle. Even with their perspective on how Mamdani's changes to the Democratic Party, or his desired changes, can actually affect the entire country at some point. Dan Turrentine, former Democrat advisor, co-host of the morning meeting, Mark Penn, former Clinton advisor, and pollster. Mark, let's start with you. This view that the Democrats are really caught here in a trap of their own making, they really gravitated toward the energy of the squad, and they enjoyed that, even though they know their views were too far left. But now the party's gone left because they didn't really deliver. What do they do here?
Well, this is a big problem, and there is a lot of panic, I think, in New York generally, in terms of what can they do, how can this used to be in September, and there would have been a runoff between Zohan and Andrew Cuomo in the old system, an extreme move to the left, because this, and with a voting system nobody could figure out, because this has been played with and moved to like the dead of summer when turnout's going to be low and activists can win the day. So we need to get our election system back. And right now, I think this is a really bad turn for the Democratic Party if something isn't figured out here before Election Day.
Well, Dan, even Obama's former OMB director is warning about just how radical this, in a radical direction, this could take the Democrat Party, and how
it's open.
It's going to be part of the left. Watch this.
Hold on.
To say that I think the Democratic Party is becoming increasingly anti-Semitic and anti-capitalism, turning towards socialism and turning away from your moral principles through anti-Semitism never works. There is a fundamental concern that I have, and I think many people have, about the direction of the Democratic Party.
Well, that's nice to hear, Dan, but he's the CEO of Lazard, a massive financial institution. Where was he when they were, completely rampaging through New York City after George Floyd? Where was he when they were ripping down statues? Where were any of these Democrats? They loved that moment because they thought it was going to get Trump out of office. And now, what do they expect?
Yeah, I mean, on some level, what happened this past weekend with the bombing in Iran kind of exemplifies this. I remember in 2006, Mark was involved in this stuff too at the time. You had Democrats talking about cutting the money off of the troops in Iraq. And Nancy Pelosi called the caucus together and said, knock it off. We had just won the majority. She said, we need to be serious. We're not going to leave the troops in the field. She kept order, and she said, hey, we'll hold the administration accountable, but we're not doing this. What happened this weekend? One of the first people to put a statement out on Saturday night, AOC. We should impeach the president. Now you have candidates, not only do they have to answer for socialists in New York, they have to answer for cutting off, impeaching Donald Trump for bombing Iran, cutting off money for ICE, and that's just in the last 2 weeks.
Could they tame the lion now at this point, Mark? I mean, the lion's out there. How are they going to possibly, we'll put the lion back in the cage? I think that day is over.
Well, look, we're going to have to see how eventually the Democratic Party settles down. Look, the reaction to this may be to move the party in the opposite and back to a more centrist direction in a presidential campaign. We don't really know. We do know that, interestingly, Zohan's strongest supporters were college-educated people making over $100,000, who are now in the column of being anti-Semitic socialists. That's the paradox of what's happened in these elections in the Democratic Party right now.
Well, explain, Dan, Bill Clinton's reaction here and Schumer, where they're pretty effusively congratulating Mamdani, but they're stopping short of endorsing him. Do you think, and both of you know him, do you think that he's hoping that this guy crashes and burns and that his hands can be clean? It wasn't Bill Clinton who did it. It wasn't the Democrat Party that forced this kind of roll over and change this dynamic in this race somehow. Maybe someone else comes into the race. Maybe there's a viable candidate. Maybe one of the others wins.
I think it's a great question because not only has Chuck Schumer not endorsed him, Hakeem Jeffries hasn't endorsed him, and the other senator, Kirsten Gillibrand, who's the head of the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee, has also been silent. And I think that tells you everything that you need to know. They know that their members, that the Democrats in the House and the Senate, are going to have to answer for this guy. And I think they're trying to figure it out. Do they endorse him or do they just remain silent? It's hard. Abigail Sandberger and Sam running in Virginia, it's hard for them because they live in New York City.
Well, Dan and Mark, this is going to be fascinating to watch. Zohran Mamdani is a young guy, but he's actually, I think he's pretty impressive as a young politician. I don't agree with anything he says, but look out, Democrat Party. Here he comes. Thank you both. Do New Yorkers ultimately really want to live like this?
Have you seen what Batman is up against in Gotham and what the guy running for mayor is up against? That's what it reminds me of. They're taking Wall Streeters and they can walk out onto the ice in the East River and then they fall through. I mean, there is a class warfare.
Some New Yorkers are thinking of packing up and getting out already. They call it the Mamdani migration. The New York Post is reporting that real estate agents are getting flooded with phone calls. Luxury real estate agent Ryan Serhan told the Post that his number one job will be moving people from New York to Florida again. And based on the results, clients are going to hold off on making any kind of investment in New York City. Lydia Moynihan knows all about this. She's a financial correspondent at the Post and broke this story. Lydia, I had a bunch of my friends over the weekend when they saw this coming saying, oh my goodness, I wish I sold last year. This is a nightmare. How could this be happening? So is this Mamdani migration a real thing?
I think it is, and I need to say that. Look, what's not surprising is that in the wake of him clinching that Democratic nomination, that wealthy people, really anyone with sort of a vested interest in the city, was exploring options of where they could move. Florida, of course, is a well-trodden path at this point, but what's much more concerning is the fact that people are actually walking away from deals. So people who were either in process of signing and purchasing an apartment or, potentially buying something in the future, they're walking away. So for the next 4 months, I think we're going to see a decrease in the investment in New York City. Anyone with a business is going to be a little hesitant, and of course that's going to be amplified for 4 years if Mamdani is elected. And of course, Laura, the irony is that these are the very people who he needs to be paying for all of these programs. And the things he's outlined sound like Doge cuts, right? Money, millions of dollars to transgender surgery for minors. And there's really no way that he can do that if, as I think people will, they're going to pack up and leave.
Yeah, there won't be enough rich people to tax at some point. And again, it's nice to hear that, the former Obama and folks speaking about how dangerous this is. But where were they when this, hornet's nest was beginning to form on the left? I mean, they were nowhere to be found. I mean, you didn't really hear much from any of them. Larry Summers is now worried about the Democrat Party. And, obviously as an economist, again, where was he when this was all beginning to form 6-7 years ago? Longer.
All it takes for evil to prevail is for good men to do nothing. I think people were just backed into a corner and terrified that if they said something, they were going to get canceled. I mean, that's what happened to anyone who didn't fall in line with the ideology for the past decade. But it's going to be very interesting to see, Laura, because there's a quote that I love. There's only two places where people count the number of days they're there, Florida and jail. And so I think people have been hesitant to move back to Florida. We're sort of on the cusp of seemingly the city coming back with now people are back to the office. The city seems vibrant, but there is a tipping point. And the fact that Mamdani is saying he will increase taxes further, there is a point at which people say enough is enough. I don't even put up with this anymore, and goodbye.
Hot smell 24/7, transgender surgeries all paid for, and higher taxes. Yeah, what could possibly go wrong?
The good news is that he's not going to be spending much money on police, right? Because they have anti-queer ideology. So that will be one area where we can cut costs.
Yeah, exactly. That's a good point. Lydia, great to have you on. Thank you so much. And coming up, what the Democrats and the Iranian Ayatollah have in common. We'll explain next. I'll be around 8 a.m. this morning, and you turn on.
Hello, sir. How can I be of help today?
Should have given you a jolt.
I'll send one of our best drivers right away.
It's in your DNA and in your blood to cheer against Trump. Because you want him not to be successful so bad. You have to cheer against the efficacy of these strikes. You have to hope. Maybe they were effective. Maybe the way the Trump administration's represented them isn't true. So let's take truths, spun information, leaked information, and then spin it.
The fact is, multiple intel agencies here and abroad have concluded that Iran's nuclear facilities were wiped out by our military strike. In other words, it's a win for America, it's a win for the Middle East, and of course for Donald Trump. But of course, our president's success, a giant step toward peace, is something that
what do you need?
Democrats can't concede.
Sure thing. Limo en route.
So they twist themselves like Gumby to find something to kvetch about.
I just do not think the president was telling the truth when he said this program was obliterated.
Right now, we have no final battle damage assessment. That would enable us to be comfortable or complacent about what has been done.
How comforting to know that most Democrats agree here with the Ayatollah. Not just about the damage or no damage or some damage to the nuclear program, but about Trump himself.
They attacked our nuclear facilities, which is, of course, subject to independent prosecution in international courts. But they're not able to achieve anything significant.
He needs a little more sun. He's a little pale. I wonder why. Here to discuss is Ohio Senator Bernie Moreno. Senator, we know that members of the squad, for sure, and probably other Democrats, would love to see Trump tried before the Hague for something. But for the party leaders to try to downplay this success, frankly, it's a new low. What does it say about the party?
Well, they're runnerless. They have no ideas. They have no leaders. But Laura, I'm going to give you some breaking news. One of the Democrats that you just had on your program was in the confidential briefing in the Skip today and said to General Kane, the operation that you ran will go down in the annals of American history as the greatest military operation ever conducted. A Democrat said that today. What's sick, Laura, is that they then go on TV and do everything possible politically to undermine the administration. This is
the people, they're playing the people who are stupid. That's why the people should demand them bitches to be fired.
It infuriates me. Look, I'm just going to call it like it is. Maybe I'm breaking Senate protocol here. But look, I can't stand these guys that say something in private and they go out publicly and contradict it only to score cheap political points, which weakens this country and undermines our military.
So Murphy or Blumenthal or Schumer or Mark Warner Can you just tell, was it one of those guys?
Look, Laura, you got it. Look,
Mhm.
let's make it. Why can't we just say, wow, great job.
Great
President
job.
Trump. I may not agree with you on this policy or that policy, but look what you've been able to accomplish. Historic military operation.
Great job.
Peace deal that's holding in the Middle East between two countries that were on the brink of a really bad situation. On top of what he did in Pakistan and India, on top of what he's done in Africa. This is a peace president. We should at least, can we just celebrate when the president of the United States does great things to make the world more peaceful? Is that too much to ask of our Democrat colleagues?
Well, again, nothing surprises me about this Democrat Party. They've got to perhaps elect a socialist in New York City. They're in a total box, and now this. I want to move on to something that I noticed yesterday on the Hill, where we saw a verbal takedown that you did of the Fed chair, Jerome Powell. Of course, huge contention about his refusal to lower interest rates in the
Yeah,
United
that bitch should be
States, despite
fired.
no signs of
He should be
inflation. Here's a
fired.
snippet for you.
He should be fucking fired.
It says the Federal Reserve plays no role in commenting on trade policy. So you don't comment on supply shocks. You don't comment on tax policy, which clearly affects inflation. You comment on tariffs. So I'm going to just show you, I don't comment on tariffs at all.
You did comment on it. You commented on it.
I'm only commenting
Yeah,
on
you
tariffs.
commented on it. You commented.
Government $400 billion.
He should be fired. Why the fuck are we still got him talking, man? He should be fired.
Looking at this from a fiscal lens or a political lens because you just don't like tariffs.
Powell is infuriated that Trump's tariffs have not caused
He's supposed to be fired. Fuck.
inflation. Should he be removed given the
Fucking right, he should be moved.
one man?
Absolutely.
Fucking right, he should be
He cost
removed.
This country over $400 billion a year. Plus, this is just the federal government, our cost of borrowing, plus homeowners, people who take out car loans, people who have credit card debt, businesses that are trying to get loans. One man should not be able to cost this economy,
Fucking
this country
right.
that much because he has a personal beef with the president of the United
Yeah.
States. This guy's term is up next May.
Fucking next May.
He should
fire that bitch now.
We could put somebody in there. If we just lowered our rates to where Japan,
Fire that bitch now.
who has higher inflation, Japan has higher inflation than we do, we would save hundreds of billions of dollars. We're in the middle of a tough reconciliation bill where we have to make compromises on what we're going to cut. We wouldn't have to do any of that if we had a person that was willing to just do the rational thing and cut interest rates, which is the common sense thing to do. This guy needs to go. He's a partisan.
No, it's a nightmare. You guys got cut NPR and PBS and USAID. I'm getting a lot of concern from my viewers that y'all aren't going to cut as you should. Is that going to happen?
We absolutely should. That's a rescissions package. We're going to take that up right after the big, beautiful bill. It's a no-brainer, Laura. Look, we shouldn't be funding these things. USAID was a money laundering operation. NPR and PBS are basically propaganda machines for the Democrat Party. These are no-brainer cuts. And by the way, the American people want more. They want more of the Doge cuts codified.
Yeah, well, I think we're just the tip of the iceberg of what USAID is up to. Senator, thank you very much. And still ahead, Trump made a big, beautiful closing argument. Agriculture Secretary Brooke Rollins is here.
How are you doing? She said, not good, sir. Why? The government is killing me on tips. And she looked at me, she said, sir, there should be no tax on tips. I said, say it again. There should be no tax on tips. I said, that's the coolest thing I've ever heard. And a legend was made. I want to thank that young, beautiful actress.
The president at the White House today deciding, I'm going to close this thing because the Republicans are dragging their feet on his signature legislation, the big, beautiful bill. Here to talk about this and the importance of the Republicans capitalizing on this moment, Agriculture Secretary Brooke Rollins. Madam Secretary, why is this bill stalling when Republicans have control of the Senate and the House? Got through the House, now it's at the Senate. I know they have some disagreements, but my goodness, this is ridiculous.
Well, it was a great day, and I loved the clip you just showed, Lauren. And by the way, thanks for having me on. One other thing, whether it was talking to Malachi, who was the DoorDash mom, or Luke, the electrical lineman, or James, the farmer from Virginia Beach. There's a school choice mom there. When he started the whole event, I don't know if you saw this, and most of the cabinet was there, and some of the senators and House members, and he said, I like all you guys, and it's nice to work with you, but I love all these people standing behind me and who they represent out in America. I thought that's exactly A, why he won, B, why we're going to keep winning, and C, why we're fighting. To your point, it is taking, I think, a little bit long, but the president has said he's respecting the process. But we're at sort of the 1 yard line. It's time to get it into the end zone, time to get it to President Trump's desk, and we feel pretty confident we'll get there. The bill is an effectuation of the promises this president made over the last 2 years and why he was overwhelmingly, including the popular vote, why he was reelected in November.
Yeah, and look, I think your point is so well taken about regular Americans in business or entrepreneurs. The working people of the country have been watching Washington waste billions of dollars for frankly, decades. And they're like, well, what about us? We're the ones who fund this nonsense. And I love that Trump speaks directly to them because ultimately they're the ones, and he says, pick up the phone, make your voices heard, call your congressmen, call your senators. Absolutely correct.
That's right. And, you know, it's funny. He talked a little bit today about how a lot of people thought he should break this bill up and do it in 2 or 3 or 4 bills.
No, he was right.
Yeah, one big, beautiful bill. And it's everything from securing the border for the first time ever. It's school choice. It's, you know, the tax cuts, the greatest tax cut for middle and working class Americans ever, which means a $10,000 on average more money they get to take home, which is incredible. For the farmers, it's 100% expensing. It's getting them out of the death tax on their family farms. I mean, it is a win across every single lane of policy when he made those promises, and now he's keeping them. But it's up to the Senate. The House did a great job getting it to the Senate. And I actually think I've been involved in a lot of the conversations, and we're almost there. And real kudos to the leadership in the Senate in getting this thing moving. But we've got a little bit further to go, and it's time to get there.
I want to introduce someone to the Ingram angle that they might not have known before. Senate parliamentarian Elizabeth McDonough, Madam Secretary, rejected the key Medicaid cuts in the bill, saying the provisions that would bar the use of Medicaid funds for transgender health care services and to prevent illegal aliens from receiving Medicaid. Now, the parliamentarian was appointed by, of course, Harry Reid, and was an advisor to Al Gore during the whole recount back in 2000. What else can you tell us about her?
Well, here's what I know. Just from a bigger picture, the Democrats are just better at government than we are. They are duplicitous. They will do anything they can for the win, whether it's, you know, within the legal bounds or not. And this is just one more example of how they use the process to win.
Hey, partner.
I mean, President Trump represented.
Yeah, player. We'll get it to you.
Conversations about this, and you know, it's not been conventional. He's very unconventional, but this is how he's gotten things done, and this is why the American people elected him and voted for him 3 different times now. But now the American people can see the hood has been lifted, right? We have a Democrat policy person that was appointed by a Democrat who's stopping big parts of the bill, and that has to change.
Yeah, like their own policy on the economy, they're hurting our economy. As Senate parliamentarian, stopping progress on something so common sense on the Medicaid.
That's right.
Madam Secretary, thank you for joining us. We're both in red. I mean, everyone's in red tonight. I don't know why. But up next, Jill Biden's so-called work husband he was slapped with a subpoena for refusing to testify on Biden's cognitive cover-up.
Wow, this is going to show you how much they don't tell us the truth about a bunch of shit. We just go along and get along with all this bullshit. Like little fucking sheep. Wow.
Hi everyone, I am Don Pyro with Molly Line, Madison Allworth, and David Webb, and welcome to the big weekend show, The Big Story, tonight. Heating up on Capitol Hill, the Senate currently debating the big beautiful bill, and President Trump wants the historic legislation on his desk by July 4th.
you have asked to have this on your desk by July 4th. Do you think you're going to get it in that time?
I'd like to say yes, whatever it is, as long as we have it. It's very important. If we don't have it, there's a 68% tax increase. We're cutting 1.7. Let's see, we're cutting 1.7 trillion. Think of it. We're going to have growth like we've never seen before.
Republicans can only afford to lose 3 votes if there is full attendance. At this hour, Senators Rand Paul and Tom Tillis are refusing to get behind the tax-cutting legislation. And just hours ago, Tillis announcing he will not run for re-election. Shane's great news to Trump, according to his Truth Social just minutes ago. The other GOP holdout, Rand Paul, just said this.
The new tax cuts add up to $234 billion to the debt next year. So in order not to add to the deficit, the BBB, the big not so beautiful bill, has to have corresponding spending cuts to counter all the new spending. Unfortunately, the spending cuts are backloaded to the final 5 years of the 10-year window when several tax cuts expire and the spending increases are finished.
And there
But
are
the tax cuts not so much
the
expired.
Senate version of the bill, but the key tax cutting provisions remain. We're going to be speaking with Senators Markwayne Mullin and Marsha Blackburn throughout the night. But first, let's head to Capitol Hill to check in with Dan Herbert. Check.
Todd, good evening. The Senate is inching closer to voting on the big, beautiful bill. Senate Democrats hamstrung debate on the bill. They mandated that Senate clerks take turns reading the entire bill, all 940 pages, out loud. The exercise consumed more than 16 hours. Voices failed.
To fiscal year 2026, 66 million to be derived from all contributions and to remain available until the end of fiscal year 2035 for the Director of Office to carry out subsection C thereafter.
But now the debate is on. Democrats are railing against the bill. They contend that millions will lose health benefits. Republicans are touting tax provisions and border security. And so, the debate and eventual voting on the big, beautiful bill has begun. Hallelujah. It's taken a while for us to get here, but we'll have a debate worthy of a great country. We'll have what they think and what we think, and we're going to vote on this bill in the coming days. House conservatives believe the bill evolved in the Senate. They argue that the Senate parliamentarian nixed some important House provisions to comply with Senate budget rules.
If it does pass the Senate and come over with those significant changes, it changes the framework that we agreed upon in the House from a spending perspective. And when you do that, there's a lot of us that are going to have pause because we're not cutting as much spending as we wanted to cut previously.
Now here's the schedule. The debate continues until after midnight Eastern. Then the Senate starts a marathon voting session that runs all night. A final vote comes tomorrow. But then it's up to the House to sync up. It's about the math. House Republicans can only lose 3 members and still pass the bill. Tom?
Jen, I don't know if any of the words that have been spoken over the many hours gave you any indication as to any policy potential changes, but let's try to drill down to some specifics. Let's start with salt. Where do you think the final law comes down on salt? The number and the cap.
Yeah, they seemed to get an agreement on that just the other day, and Mike Lawler, the Republican congressman from New York who's pushed this, was very happy with that. It's going to be at $40,000 here. But again, this is going to be kind of tapered over some years. There was a little bit of a signal from Nick LaLota. He's a Republican from the eastern part of Long Island, and he did not say he was a no on this, but indicated that he was a little bit cool. Nicole Malliotakis, who's a Republican from Staten Island, she seemed okay with that.
The only thing that seems a little odd to me about that is most of these tax provisions would be permanent. It seems that this one SALT provision sunsets in 2029. That seemed a little bit odd, but they have other fish to fry, and for that I will go to my colleagues on the panel here. Any other questions?
Well, yeah, so real quick, Chad, looking ahead, it goes back to the House. You said they can only have 3 holdouts. Do we have a sense of who to look out for in the House in terms of who might have issues with the Senate version of this bill?
I can go through about 30, actually. Now, that said, the Republican leadership, they indicate that the bill, from their perspective on the tax side, did not change that much.
in the Senate. And that's the argument that they're making to some of these folks. I would look at the usual suspects. I would look at Chip Roy. I would look at Tim Burchett. I would look at Eric Burleson, a Republican from Missouri. But keep in mind that some of these members are also, as they're derisively called here sometimes on Capitol Hill, the Fold Caucus. The idea that they speak out against something like this and then they come around at the very end. Remember, they passed an earlier version of this bill in the House by only one vote. It's going to be tight, and we'll see if they can accept these Senate changes.
Hey, Chad, David Webb here. I remember the Reagan rule, my 80% friend is not my 20% enemy. Any sense that the Republicans, especially coming from the Speaker's office, are having a discussion over dynamic scoring, over the individual arguments, which are always seemingly based on CBO and static points, just like Rand Paul has done in the Senate?
Yeah, that's certainly the argument that they're making. The counter argument to that, however, is that sometimes you have some of these outside groups who talk about it. These are credible groups on both the left and right and center who say that they did account for some of the dynamic scoring in this, some of the growth that they expect. And you know, this is what they always say about numbers, is that, you know, you can cook these numbers a lot of different ways. The thing that I always notice anytime they do any of these big bills, they rarely get the savings. The reason is because things happen. We have wars, we have pandemics, we have terrorism, and every time they pass one of these big bills like this, there has been an intervening event. Harold Macmillan, the British Prime Minister, said that the most important factor in politics were events. Undoubtedly,
y'all be making the fucking events happen.
We'll probably have to load up some spending, or it will change the trajectory with the economy, and that could change things down the road.
Thanks so much. We're so delighted to have you here to get your insight. You also put the numbers guy, the match out there on Capitol Hill. The Republicans can only lose 3. We know there are a few obvious holdouts, but there are others in the game that seem like they might really get into the vote arrangement, try to get amendments and that sort of thing. Who do you have your eye on?
You know, when you look at these vote-a-ramas, the voting marathons, they'll start overnight tonight. I wouldn't expect the bill to change that much. Some of these votes are really going to be engineered by both sides to try to make the other side look bad. Over the years, that's been the criticism of the vote-a-rama, where they try to say, really make this into a campaign tool. And you can imagine where they would say, okay, this Democrat in this state has a competitive re-election in 2026. Let's get them on the record here, or by the Democrats, trying to stick it to the Republicans. Kevin Cramer, the Republican senator, said earlier today that he didn't think that there was going to be that much change to the bill. But remember that this is an organic process. And sometimes, when you have that tight a vote margin in the Senate. Remember, they advanced on the procedural vote last night, 51-49. They don't have a lot of wiggle room there. Vice President Vance could break a tie. But if they change the bill, sometimes that makes people more willing to vote for it because, hey, you got your amendment in. And sometimes it works the other direction where, it makes the bill worse and somebody says, I can't vote for this now because it's out. I would keep an eye on maybe a moderate like Lisa Murkowski of Alaska.
Jay, before we let you go quickly here, did you have to listen to all 940 pages be read?
I listened off and on, and I was reminded. You remember back in the 80s they had that FedEx commercial with the guy who would come on and he would.
We are really stupid.
So that's really what they need here to get.
We are really
there's
stupid.
A provision. It's not a rule, but it's something called a standing order.
We're actually allowing these assholes to fuck over us, and we just take it up their
They don't have to read at a certain rate.
We are
They
stupid.
don't have to read loudly or softly. This
We are
is
really
actually
stupid.
something in the Senate here because there's been some criticism over the years, but I heard an awful lot of it. Let me just put it that way.
God bless you, Chad Berger, for having to sit through that so the rest of us did not. Thank you, sir, for your time. We appreciate it and your insight, of course. So the big question now then comes, because Chad answered so many of our questions. Let's look at the political implications here. What consequences could GOP senators face for not backing the big, beautiful bill? And let's start with specifics, because the consequences to Tom Tillis are kind of null and void. He said, I'm not running. I'm going to go get a consulting job or retire. I don't get a consulting job or retire regardless of whether we vote for this. I'm looking at Rand Paul. So Dave, the question becomes, would Donald Trump actually primary or use his mechanisms to primary Rand Paul?
Fucking right. Primary his bitch
They
ass.
certainly have a collegial relationship. They go back and forth. The difference is, would he primary him? Yes. Because
Our primary
This-
did.
And I mentioned dynamic scoring and Rand's arguments, and he does what his father did, and I knew his father for many years, and he would use a silo argument only based on something that fit the argument.
Mhm.
Rand's doing the same thing, and it's a bit disingenuous.
Yeah,
At the same
disingenuous.
time, he's been known to be the flop, or the fold, I think that's the word, that comes around on these bills. When he
I told you, 'cause he a
bigger
fucking
picture.
rhino.
Mitch McConnell's
He a
about
fucking
to be
rhino.
out. Rand Paul, if he wants to be the senior senator in Kentucky, does not need upheaval when even some of the more moderate, independent, rich voters who once supported Andy Bashir and the Bashir family over the decades were not that thrilled about him. So his primary and his chances could become a problem for him, and a vote for Trump would solidify the growing base in Kentucky for him.
Madison, I'm glad David brought up Ron Paul, because if you look at Ron Paul's history, he was not a Republican for every single one of his years. He definitely vacillated into libertarianism and the like. Did you ever see Rand Paul becoming an independent and maybe caucusing with the Republicans?
Oh, I mean, that's interesting. I mean, he's done well as a Republican, even as the party has changed with President Trump. So if necessary, I'm sure he could, because he's definitely someone who will stick to his beliefs. I know a big issue for him is the debt issue, which many Republicans obviously also take issue with. Would he need to switch to independent? I don't necessarily see that happening, but if that was the path forward, I'm sure he would take it. I think he's someone who, obviously, could change his mind, but he's really drilled down on this deficit issue, which I think is a good point, because even, what Chad was just saying is the case. Events happen, and we've just looked at the last 2 weeks. There are things that come up. So, the Senate bill increases the deficit by $3.3 trillion, according to the CBO. And then you have senators like Mike Rounds of South Dakota saying, well, $4 trillion will be added to the economy. But I think there's a lot of senators, Paul included, that would say it's still not good enough because we're taking on too much debt.
And Molly, I'm glad that your question for Chad, you tried to get names. And one of those names was Lisa Murkowski.
Yeah.
And I wonder, how much pressure does Donald Trump have over Lisa Murkowski, somebody who he has been attacking for years, and she somehow manages, based upon her name in that state, to always come out ahead of the game, at least when it comes to winning elections. How much pressure does he ultimately have on her?
Well, it's interesting because another senator that we perhaps should be watching as the vote round gets underway is Senator Susan Collins, kind of in the same vein from up in Maine. And she's talked about how she voted to move things forward procedurally, but that she wants to see changes, that there are some very good changes that have been made in the latest version, but I want to see further changes, and only filing a number of amendments. So there are a number of Republicans really, that have been independent and have been willing to cross the aisle, cross party lines, that are going to be interesting to watch as this gets underway before things head back over to the House.
With both of those names you mentioned, Collins and Murkowski, you have the rural hospital issue with Medicaid cuts, and that's a concern. So the question becomes when. I've been working a lot. We had a little bombing thing on last weekend. I had to come in. I need next weekend off. I need July 4th off. So my question for you is, when are we going to get this thing?
If they're able to complete by tomorrow, I think some of the projections are around 11 a.m., then it could go to the House on Tuesday late or Wednesday early. So it is possible to get the vote ahead of time. As far as rounding up the votes, the work being done in the House has been successful so far to bring people around. I've been to some of the GOP conferences to cover them when the congressmen get together. And I think they're a little bit more aligned in the House than people think. The Salt Caucus is arguing for the Salt Caucus. They know they've lost that argument. As for the senators, Murkowski and Collins get heavy union support. Mitch McConnell's about to be out. Ranked choice voting is on the table. They, again, in Alaska, which takes Murkowski out. So they have to consider their political future without Sugar Daddy Mitch being the leader in the Senate.
Gotta go to Tees, but quickly, do you think we get it by the 4th, yes or no?
I think we do. I think the Senate passes it Monday. The House will be hard-pressed to not go with Trump.
Molly, are you watching the Pops or are you watching the bill on the July 4th? Different balls.
The president was asked about this by Maria Bartiromo, and he said, I don't know. He said, whatever it is, as long as we have it, it's very important. I don't know that it really matters if it's the 4th, or if it's next week, or Monday, or Tuesday, or Wednesday.
They need soon, because business owners need some certitude as to what they do, as Madison well knows. Coming up on this jam-packed big weekend show, more Iranians are arrested this week as the nation is on high alert for possible sleeper cells in the U.S. But first, Democrats are drooling over their socialist mayoral candidate, but New York City's single, they ain't feeling the vibes.
Plenty of controversial positions, including his race-based plan
to raise taxes on white neighborhoods. The Socialist Star doubled down on that proposal today.
Explain why you're bringing race into your tax proposal.
That is just a description of what we see right now. It's not driven by race, it's more of an assessment of what neighborhoods are being undertaxed versus overtaxed. We've seen time and again that this is a property tax system, but it's inequitable.
So no plans to change that language on your website.
The focus here is to actually ensure a fair property tax system, and that the use of that language is an assessment of the neighborhood.
All right. Mamdani's agenda could ruin America's biggest city, but Democrats have already anointed him as their socialist savior.
He outworked, he out-communicated, and he out-organized the opposition, and that's clearly why he was successful.
You need to have a compelling vision that you actually believe that he genuinely cares, and if you don't genuinely care, you can easily see through that.
What you're talking about de-rigging the economy every single day, when you're presenting big, bold ideas on how to do that, you're going to do pretty well in elections, and so Democrats should learn from his victory.
But President Trump is now warning what could happen to the Big Apple if Mamdani wins the election.
I think it's very bad for New York. I don't know that he's going to get into inconceivable abilities, but he's a communist, and he's a pure communist. I think he admits it, but I can't imagine it. But let's say this: if he does get in, I'm going to be president, and he's going to have to do the right thing, or they're not getting any money. He's a radical left lunatic.
Democrats are having an identity crisis right now. The only thing they can agree on is hating Trump.
This is the identity crisis that they have. I think it's just a collection of people that don't like Trump right now. It feels like they're way too poll tested.
While an article in Vox warns the entire Democrat base is ready to revolt. I want to come to you first so that we can hit on the white neighborhood tax plan. There's so many things to discuss, but even just I want to start from a legal perspective. How does that even work? Can it work?
Yeah, I don't even need to do the policy. I'll just do the legal. No, it doesn't. Day one of constitutional law, you learn that no law can be racially discriminatory, especially on its face. Now, this individual, Zohran Mamdani, had a couple of hours, a couple of days to take it down off of his website so that lawyers who want to fight him on this won't be able to point to the fact and be like, hey, you had an admission against interest. But no, with Kristen Welker right there, he doubled down and says, no, I'm keeping it on the website. This is the simplest battle for a lawyer in history. You copy the website, you say, it's facially discriminatory, case closed. You literally can't do. Put aside the fact that the mayor of New York does not set tax policy. That's done by the assembly of which he is currently a part. Put aside that it's a horrible idea. You legally can't do this. And it's concerning to me that he doesn't have a lawyer on his staff telling him that he can't.
But you know what he does? A very effective communication strategy. And that's something you mentioned, and I saw it on the Millennial in this City all over my social media, where people supporting him and his words. So he's saying things, though, like she also gave him the opportunity to say, to want to step back, mobilize the intifada. But he seems to be pushing ahead with things like taxing white neighborhoods, anti-Semitic rhetoric. Does that impact his chances? I think part of the appeal is how unapologetic he is about who he is and what he stands for, and that he's not backing down on that. And people that agree with him find that very appealing, and people who aren't so sure still find the genuineness to be refreshing. David Hoga, we just showed as part of the montage there, but on X, too many of our Democratic politicians can't answer questions, can't do interviews, and can only recite talking points. And this is someone who says what he actually believes, whether or not you're going to agree with him, or maybe sue later. And what does this mean for the future of the Democratic Party if this is their golden socialist boy, David?
Unfortunately for New York City, and I'll say it this way, if you elect a socialist, you get a communist. Those are his policy outlines. And I hope this continues in the Democrat Party, because frankly, this party is bereft of any policy that's based in economics or reality. But Legalese answer, very accurate. When you look at the playbook of what socialists do and use, whether you want to look at an Alinskyite approach or others, these are strategies. You use race, you use economic warfare, so class warfare and, frankly, ethnicity, because there's only one race. It's human. Procreation is proof it works. The fact is they are infected with this. They sell envy. The genuine nature that Molly talks about does come across, but the understanding, the context behind it doesn't exist. And they repeat the message because his goal is not whether he can do it as an assemblyman. He can put a bill on the in committee right now to do that. It's that he can keep selling this to the point where people actually buy it enough to support them. It's a playbook. It has something to do with reality and changing reality, but it doesn't mean that their goal in the end is not to get a socialist dystopia.
Well, let's pivot. Talk strategy, specifically dating strategy, because Democrats aren't the only ones falling in love with Mondani. Gen Z liberals are using him to vet dates. A man went viral after canceling a date with a girl who demanded to know if he voted for Zoran, with many in the comments agreeing that the guy made the right call. She asked him before they went out, hey, did you vote for him? I'm really excited he won. Date canceled. Liberals, though, they're re-downloading the dating app Hinge because they heard that's where Mondani met his wife. And you're like chomping at the bit. Is excited to get all this attention, to get more downloads. It's good for business, you know?
He's a guy with business that Hinge is getting attention. By the way, that real estate silly boy who talked about that like big scale.
He was great though. He's
okay. And a bar, a game, somewhere, meeting other people. What is the difference primarily? How relationships are formed and how they last. Are there relationships that are based on meeting on an app? Why do they succeed? It's because there's actually something there between the people, not the app between them. These people are so vacuous of future thoughts or long-term thoughts, even if from a low didn't develop enough, that they don't think about it's the person I have to interact with. Rather, I need the app to sustain me. What happens when the app goes away?
Well, I think that one goes away is that there's a lot more single people, but I would say my generation struggles with dating as it is. And speaking of, let's go back to that conversation between this and the guy going on a date where she asked him if he voted for Zoran and then he canceled the date. Did he avoid the headache, or is that a problem in and of itself? That before you even meet, you're asking who you voted for? I'm so near this forever. You can't, definitely don't date based on one particular politician. Because this is a moment in time. So find somebody, that supports you on both sides. But I do think it's crazy how much he has mobilized the youth vote. He has done it. Everyone has tried to do it. He actually did it, and the numbers are crazy. The 18 to 24-year-olds, possibly the largest group in the New York City mayoral primary. That is wild numbers. That's from the New York Times.
It's not even funny no more. It's pitiful. LeBron James could never be the GOAT. I already told you, he just did it. Ain't no GOAT in him.
Attacking you, but I'm attacking your generation. The Gen Zers have trouble dating because you complicate dating so much. Yeah, your first date with somebody, and the older people at this table will agree, is 100% supposed to be based off of physical attraction. That gets you to the interview part of the date. Learn about the individual, and if this is a partner, based upon the other aspects of their life that you want to live with.
Yeah, Tom, but I don't think you realize dating apps are all about looks, because all you do is look at the
the millennials take it over.
The jury is set to begin deliberations.
LeBron James is
trafficking case. How long will it take jurors to decide his fate? And Republican Senator Mark Wayne Mullen joins us next to give us a status update on the big, beautiful bill. Do not go anywhere. You don't want to miss it.
because he's no GOAT.
This is a live look at the Senate floor where debate continues.
Nowhere's close.
Bill, a vote-a-rama.
He flip-flop like a fish. Too much.
Hours where senators will
And it's not funny no more.
amendments to the legislation. The
It's really
process
pitiful.
could take up to 15
So
hours
stop
for the Senate as a final vote. Joining us now,
putting LeBron James and Michael Jordan in the same boat,
Wayne Mullen. Sir,
because that
thank
boat can't
you
float.
for joining all of us here on this
Especially
Sunday evening.
LeBron
Really
James
appreciate
will.
it. It sounds
It'll
like
sink.
you might have a plan today.
Because he's not a clutch.
Right now, what are you thinking?
Well, we had an all-nighter last night. We expect to have one tonight. I'm just glad that
Because
I'm on the team.
LeBron James is not a
Because
clutch
if you're putting
player.
me on any team,
He
I'd rather
can't
be on his team. I've
come
seen
through in the
Schiffer
clutch
and Thune work
at
out.
all.
I believe we have more stamina on the Republican Party, so we can last longer.
And so I know that so much of the Senate has focused on Medicaid. What can you tell us about where things stand with the discussion over Medicaid, and are you expecting any hesitation from more of your Republican colleagues?
I think this is just a combination of a lot of great ideas coming together, and we finally have to make a play call. At the end of the day, we're going to have a bill on the floor that's going to get 51 votes, going to be able to pass the House and be able to get the president's desk. But as far as Medicaid goes, there's a lot of passion about this, right? Rick Scott, for instance, he used to own a lot of hospitals, has some really great ideas, understands